Hi, I'm Sarah Whiting. I'm the mayor of the GSD. Harvard University's Graduate School of Design sits on the ancestral land of the Massachusetts people, who were the original inhabitants of what we now know as Cambridge and Boston. We pay respect to the people of the Massachusetts tribe, past, present, and future, and we honor the land itself, which remains sacred to the Massachusetts people. So this acknowledgement is a recognition of a population whose land has been taken. It's also a recognition of the importance of site and land to those people. The Massachusetts stewarded the land. Today is Earth Day. And let us all pause and bear in mind that we're all obligated now to steward the land that we live on, our earth, our collective future. We're gathered here in Piper Auditorium, and let me give you a quick snapshot of some of the things that have taken place in this space just over the last few days. We had on Monday a lecture on the Tokyo Toilet Project, which is an amazing project paid for by private money that is putting, I think it's 7 or 8 public toilets in Shibuya Park in Tokyo, designed by architects. And so a sort of really extraordinary project that we heard about by Koji Yanai, who is the person behind it. On Wednesday, we had a small symposium showcasing 6 faculty presentations that were all representing three of our departments. They were all on climate-related research. Last night, we had a lecture by 2 Parisian architects. And today, we have mayors imagining the just city. Why am I telling you all this? Partly, it's to share and draw attention to the amazing things going on here at the GSD. Hey, I'm a dean. Part of my job is akin to being mayor. I help to shepherd this whole school into one, so I want to share that information. But if you see the GSD like a city, Piper Auditorium is like our downtown crossing. Or if you're from Chicago, it's like State and Madison. It's the intersection where things take place, where stuff goes on. So cities used to be far more predictable in terms of what was happening in their buildings and their public spaces. That's not so true anymore. Today, all your cities are more and more like our messy but extraordinary world of this school. They're full of ideas, they're full of energy, they're full of different voices, and they're full of ambitions. Everything we do here at the GSD is affected by or affects cities. We all work here to design a better future. You mayors spend every day shepherding the present world towards that better future. Cities have 2 challenges. Okay, I know they have more than 2 challenges, but I'm going to focus on 2 big ones. The climate crisis, and again, I point to today being Earth Day, and then the challenge, but also I would say the opportunity that cities bring together ever more diverse populations into single spaces. Piper Auditorium scaled up. Starting in the 19th century, cities worldwide started growing into what we know them to be now, fueled by industrialization and global capital. The inequities that underlie the history of our cities in the US and worldwide have become untenable, and today, already well into the 21st century, we're beginning the hard work of addressing and changing that fact. The Mayor's Institute what is MICD? Mayor's Institute on City Design? Okay, thanks. I'm terrible at acronyms, which is really bad. So the MICD, Just City Mayoral Fellowship, is, in my opinion, a powerful step in making that change, and I want to thank the 8 mayors who devoted time to this effort. I look forward to hearing your homework today. I also want to thank T-Squared. That would be Toni Griffin and Trinity Simons, who've put this extraordinary program in place along with their teams, so I guess it's T-cubed. I couldn't be happier that this fellowship program has happened and has taken shape, has taken off, and is taking place here at the school. And now it's my honor to introduce National Endowment for the Arts Chair, Dr. Maria Rosario Jackson. Dr. Jackson was appointed to this position just this past January, so she's fresh. She's often referred to as the first African-American and Mexican-American woman appointed as chair of the NEA, which is fabulous. But I want to point out another first. Having received her doctorate in urban planning from UCLA, Dr. Jackson is the first urban planner appointed as chair of the NEA. In short, she's one of us. Dr. Jackson has a long career in strategic planning, policy research, and evaluation with philanthropic, governmental, and nonprofit organizations at the national, regional, and local levels. Currently on leave from Arizona State University, she's a tenured professor in the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, where she led the Studio for Creativity, Place, and Equitable Communities, and also held an appointment in the Watts College of Public Service and Community Solutions. All you planners work with, like, it's like German words. It's like everything is added up to everything else. Additionally, she's been a senior advisor at the Kresge Foundation and a senior research associate in the Metropolitan Housing and Communities Policy Center in the Urban Institute in Washington, where she was the founding director of the Culture, Creativity, and Communities program. All of this is a long way of saying that Dr. Jackson has been a tireless advocate for driving forth the role of arts and culture in rendering our world more just, more humane, and more ethical. Finally, I have insider intel. Okay, I heard it at the meet and greet yesterday, but that's pretty good intel, I think, that Dr. Jackson is a dynamic speaker. In short, I think she can hold her own in the context of this lively cohort of mayors whose energy and laughter frequently leaked out from Stubbins these past couple days. Dr. Jackson, we are so honored and so grateful to have you here this afternoon. Thank you.
So Dean Whiting, thank you for that warm welcome and introduction. Hello, everybody. Hello. Hi. I'm delighted to be with you today. This is a celebration of the completion of the Just Mayoral Fellowship program, which I think is such an important, meaningful, collective experience. So congratulations to the mayors that have had the blessing of this program. I would like to extend a special thanks to, again, Dean Whiting, Toni Griffin, Director of the Just City Lab and designer of the Just City Mayoral Fellowship Program, Tom Cochran with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and Trinity Simons and Grace Oren of MICD, and also GSD students Jessica Walker and Tolu Ogdubesan. Thank you. To the mayors here, thank you for your leadership. Thank you for going the extra mile to ensure that you're equipped to do your best work, for doing your part to help lead us towards our aspiration of opportunity-rich communities that allow us all to reach our full potential. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you as you complete this program and as I step into this position and am establishing priorities from this perch at the National Endowment for the Arts. I think the NEA's involvement in the MICD program has always held a particular importance for me as someone with an urban planning background, because it's in this kind of forum where one can see the critically important role that arts, culture, creativity, design, that all of that has in advancing healthy communities and the evolution of healthy cities. For the better part of 30 years, from different perches, my work has been at the intersection of arts and culture and comprehensive community development and urban planning. And early in my career, I will tell you, I was discouraged from having this particular focus. And I had, so just a little bit of backstory. So I did my work at UCLA. Back then, it was the Graduate School of Architecture and Urban Planning. It's not that anymore. Urban planning has spun off to the public policy school or public affairs, and the architecture program has spun off to fine arts, so that it's separate now, but at the time it was together. And within that, we certainly had exposure as planners to urban design and design issues, working with architects and similar. The stretch into the arts was a little further, and often, not just as a graduate student, but even further in my career, the expectation as a planner was that I should be doing things like housing or labor or environmental issues, things that were more legibly related to the field, let's say. So I would have well-meaning colleagues often say, you know, you care about the causes and consequences of injustice. Why are you doing this arts and culture stuff? Like it was off mission. And it used to annoy me. It really did annoy me. Early in my career, I didn't have the words to explain myself and describe why I wasn't off mission, because it was gut. Eventually, I found the words, and what I've been able to say for a number of years now is, if around the world and throughout the ages you look, in strategies to disempower, the first thing that is tampered with is one's ability to make meaning, to ask questions, to have aesthetics, to express yourself creatively, to do the things that we do through art. So if it is so powerful that it has to be tampered with in order to subjugate or control or oppress, why don't we understand it as core to building? So if you peel the onion a little further, you know, the root of my commitment to this particular focus has to do with childhood. So I'm the daughter of an African-American man that endured Jim Crow. I'm the daughter of a Mexican immigrant woman. I grew up in a context where they were concerned that what I would hear, what my brother and I would hear about who we were, was going to diminish us and would somehow be dehumanizing. And they resorted to the arts as a way of finding other narratives, right? So they weren't artists, they weren't wealthy collectors, they were people who were looking for ways of protecting their children, and they resorted to the arts because they thought that that was part of what they needed to provide in order for us to thrive. So this idea that the arts are critically important to opportunity-rich environments where people can reach their full potential has a deep seed that comes from family. It's borne out in research and observations and other things that have come through over the course of decades in my career, but I know the core, and that's why I knew I wasn't off mission. So from this perch now, as chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, I think about what are the concepts that are important to socialize as I think of wanting to build just places, healthy cities, healthy communities. And I think one of the first things that I'd like to share is a set of principles that, for me, help to illuminate a more elastic understanding of what it means and what's required to have artful lives. So I think that artful lives are part of what is required for just and equitable communities. And there are some principles that I would just ask you to consider. So one is that creativity is a natural impulse and a community asset from which to build. So communities are not blank slates. And often what is overlooked is the creativity and the cultural assets that exist even in communities that have been historically marginalized, sometimes especially in communities that have been historically marginalized. So this notion of creativity as an asset and organic culture as an asset is something that I think is really important. And again, the extension of that is recognition that communities aren't blank slates. So that's one. The second is that cultural self-determination is a critical dimension of justice and equity. So the ability to tell your own story on your own terms, the ability to construct those narratives, to make sense of the world on your own terms, this is something that is part of a healthy community. The third is that cultural participation takes many forms and happens in a wide range of venues. So while audience participation, which is usually what we think of, is important, there are many other ways that we engage in the arts by making, doing, teaching. And arts and cultural activity happens in cultural venues, to be sure, but also in other places. Because if we have artful lives, it's not just limited to certain buildings, let's say, but it permeates. The idea that, the fourth idea is that art process can be as important as, or sometimes even more important than art product. And sometimes that's a hard one to grasp because we are taught to look to the thing that we're going to consume. And sometimes the process, the act of being in a creative process, in a collective creative process sometimes, actually is more important than the thing that is to be made at the end, right? Because it's through that collective process or that creative engagement that all of these other things happen, whether it is the ability to bolster stewardship of place or to impact collective, the ability to act collectively, or whether it has to do with building the muscle to hold nuance, which I think is so important, especially now, you know. Can we build the muscle to have civic conversations that aren't reduced to sound bites? Or can we stay in that space that's a little bit uncomfortable, but that you have to navigate through if you're going to get unstuck, let's say? Participation in the arts, I think, has these kinds of contributions. But that cultural participation, again, is not just about the making of the thing at the end to be consumed, but the creative process itself. A fifth idea, and it's related, is that artists and designers have many kinds of relationships with publics and roles within communities. And I say publics intentionally because I think it's a more elastic term than audiences. But this is an example, right? This whole program is an example of how designers, in this case, are intersecting in very different ways in helping to imagine policy, to create programs, to help us think about what cities and neighborhoods need to look like and how they need to work going forward. So recognition that artists and designers can have these other ways of participating in our society, I think, is critically important. And the last point is that arts and cultural activity is intrinsically important, period. Full stop. At the same time, it is important because it can contribute to other community dynamics and aspirations. So again, the idea of being able to hold nuance, the bolstering of stewardship of place, collective agency, the notion of being able to see something from a different perspective, so reframing, the ability to imagine working differently, retooling. And I think that reframing and retooling has to be at work before we can actually do the work of repair. So this notion of reframe, retool, repair, I think that artists and designers are so critically important to that process. The other thing that I would want to lift up is that integration of the arts in how we think of building healthy communities also has to do with getting out of our heads. There is research that shows that in order for people to actually shift paradigms and change how they think, that it can't just be an intellectual experience, that it has to be emotional and physical, right? So those three things converge. There's actually an opening, a window, an opportunity to shift something. And it is, again, through creative practice, through exposure to these different active and passive experiences of the arts that we begin to cultivate that. I keep saying if we don't figure out how to advance artful lives and how to make sure that artists, designers, and arts organizations and similar, if we don't figure out a way to include them in how we shape what I think of as our civics infrastructure, right? So the mechanisms and relationships that we rely on to care for each other. If we don't figure out how to do that integration, we'll be stuck. And we can't do our best work, whether it is in the health field or community development or environment. There is something about the integration that is critically important to allow us to advance. So as I think about the work from the perch of the National Endowment for the Arts, I think about, again, the idea of advancing artful lives, the notion of healthy arts ecosystems that support that and that support that connection between the arts and other sectors. In 2021, the Arts Endowment distributed $135 million in resources through the American Rescue Plan and additional resources through CARES, the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act. One of the things that I'm really interested in is looking to see how those resources have been invested and what they will lead to, particularly coming out of a time where over the last 2 years, we have been forced to reimagine how we live and how we think about things. So this idea that there is orthodoxy in some ways has been turned on its head, right? Things that we did pre-pandemic, we've realized that we don't necessarily have to do or do in the same way. There's also an environment now where there is increased attention to long-standing injustice and lots of proclamations about wanting to address that. So in this time where there is an invitation to not do the same thing and an edict to repair, to make whole again in so many ways, the question I ask is, can we resist the impulse to snap back to business as usual? And can we actually take the time to learn the lesson, whatever the lesson is over the last few years, and proceed in a way that is informed by that examined experience? And my hope is that from the perch of the NEA, that we can be a partner in that process. So the organization is primarily a grant-making organization, and it is that at its core. But thinking about what it means to invest in ways that are impactful and efficient, durable, that's something that I'm really interested in, and I think I bring that planning lens to that intention. So I'm thrilled that this program exists, that the mayors have gone through it, that Toni has designed it and Trinity has helped to execute it with the team. I'm excited about the next versions of it, and I'm just delighted to be here with you to celebrate and to let you know that I hope you will look to the endowment as a partner in your journey. Particularly in this moment in time where there's so much possibility. And I'll end there. Thank you.
Hey, everyone. This will, what's that? I know. There's no, I could stand to have a platform back here. So I'm Trinity Simons. I'm the executive director of the Mayor's Institute on City Design. At the Mayor's Institute, we believe that design is fundamental in shaping resilient and equitable and thriving communities, and through a variety of collaborative programs and sessions and resources, we equip mayors to be the chief urban designers of their cities. We believe that design is more than an aesthetic, that it's a problem-solving tool, that it's a galvanizer of people. It can help illustrate a vision and establish a roadmap to achieving that vision, and that it's a tool and a skill that all leaders can learn to achieve meaningful change. So the Mayor's Institute, just a little bit more background on what we are, since you've heard the name a bunch now. We were founded in 1986 by the former mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, Mayor Joe Riley. And over 36 years, we've taken over 1,200 mayors through the Mayor's Institute. So I'm going to talk very briefly about what the Institute is. So since 1986, the Mayor's Institute session, our kind of flagship program, has essentially stayed the same, and that's that we bring a small group of mayors together with a small group of design and development professionals to talk about what the mayor considers to be their most pressing city design, city planning challenge. We bring those mayors together with a small group of design and development professionals, so people who represent fields of architecture, landscape architecture, urban planning, transportation planning, real estate development, economic development, historic preservation. We go beforehand and help the mayors select their project, and those topics, range from, let's say, waterfront development to downtown revitalization, neighborhood commercial revitalization, affordable housing, greenways, blueways, and then over 2.5 days, the mayors give presentations on their case study, and then the whole group gives feedback, and those suggestions range from design ideas to implementation suggestions to funding strategies to community engagement, and interspersed with those, the members of our design and development team give presentations from their areas of expertise. We do 5 to 6 of these a year. There's 3 things about them that we say really make them work. One is that there's no press. Everything that's discussed at the Mayor's Institute stays at the Mayor's Institute. There's no outside observers. Mayors travel without staff to the Institute. There's also no other outside funders in the room. The Mayor's Institute is a leadership initiative of the National Endowment for the Arts. It's held in partnership with the United States Conference of Mayors. We have representatives from those organizations, but no one else from outside. And then each of these design and development professionals sign agreements that say they won't seek work in the city on the project the mayor brought for at least a year after the Institute. So we're not putting mayors in a room full of people, who are seeking work. We call it design jury duty, but we're creating a space where mayors can talk really candidly about the challenges that they're facing. So, mayors get really concrete and actionable ideas for the projects that they bring us, but we really say the true value of the Institute is this exposure to the design process, to design thinking, how design can be a tool in each of their leadership portfolios. Again, that design is not an aesthetic, that it's a way to put people first and improve their lives. And curiously, while this space of educating mayors has gotten a little crowded in recent years, it turns out when you're elected mayor, there's a little bit of a learning curve. This program was one of the first of those that's still around, and some of those programs that maybe higher profile have learned a lot from the Mayor's Institute. So that's basically what we did for 34 years. It was incredibly effective at achieving the original goals of the program. But even before the pandemic, the needs of mayors were changing rapidly. And virtually every mayor that we worked with had their own version of a tale of two cities. Mayors were running for election to assist these neighborhoods to serve these neighborhoods that had been left behind, and the kind of, low-hanging fruit of urban planning, of community development was gone. I mean, the mayors, it may not have we may not have completed those projects, but you kind of knew what you needed to do. But they were much more concerned about, how you revive the Black Main Street that was destroyed by transportation decisions, by neglect, by intentional displacement, by, how to do any investment that would have a direct positive impact on kind of hyper-local residents, about how to engage residents that had lost trust in local government. So the pandemic gave us, this moment to better put our ideals into action and to, obviously, the kind of in-person convening that we had built our legacy around was not possible during that time. But to serve mayors in really specific, very timely ways as we emerge from the pandemic. And now we're, incorporating those lessons and programs and strategies into our organization. But that brings us to the program that we are concluding this week and the panel that we're having today. The germ of the idea of this program began at a convening that Toni held here at the GSD in April of 2019, where we took a really deep and honest and candid dive on what design's role could be in achieving justice. In the moments after the murder of George Floyd, we were asking, and we saw mayors asking, what does it mean to achieve racial justice in the built environment? So I reached out to Toni, and I think I asked, what would it look like if we had legions of mayors trained in justice in the built environment? And from that email, we started, until we started with the first cohort, I think it was about 2 months. It was very fast. We were very much building the plane as we flew it. The mayors that you'll meet here today are from the second cohort of mayors, the first group to meet in person. They've gone through an 11-week curriculum doing readings and lectures and having open and honest discussions. This week they brought projects from their cities to workshop in the traditional MICD model. Toni's going to talk a lot more detail about what this program has been and the kind of outcomes that we've seen. And then, of course, you're going to hear from the mayors. I don't think you need me to introduce Toni to you. You all know Toni. I will just say that she has spent her career really asking how design can be a tool to achieve justice, and this program wouldn't be a fraction of what it is without her leadership. So turn it over to Toni and then to our mayors. Thank you.
Thank you, T1. Good afternoon, everybody, and really excited to bring the culmination of this year's City Mayoral Fellowship live and in person, and to all of those who are watching from at home and on your couch and around the country and in some of the cities that their mayors are representing. Welcome to the virtual GSD. I'm going to get us going really quick, but before I do that, I just want to provide just a smidgen of context before we get into the first program. So I, like Dr. Jackson, had many periods of reflection on the impact of my work, and so coming from practice and teaching, found this different space of this thing called research and a research lab, and was really trying to figure out if the work I was doing was having any meaningful, lasting impact on social and spatial justice. So that began what is now emerging on a 9th year of research that now lives here at Harvard at the Just City Lab. We, over those years, have done a lot of things to try to articulate what we think that is. At the moment, we are positioning that as a city where all people and communities, but especially the least not included, have access to networks and environments that offer the opportunities and resources to be productive and prosperous, advancing their social and economic mobility and agency. We continue to interrogate this as a live question for us, and in fact, we're trying to prove the existence of it. We're trying to prove the existence of design's role and the impact that it can really have, so that we're moving beyond the rhetoric of equity, sustainability, resiliency. We do that through publication and research reports. We do that through design case studies. We do that through public exhibitions. We do that by creating what we call the Just City Index that helps us develop a shared language, no matter what context we're in, that establishes the meaning, right? We heard Dr. Jackson talked about the meaning of what that culture and what that city needs as a part of their Just City. We do convenings like this. We actually do analytics. We are a little bit wonky in this regard. We want to know if a Just City in Rotterdam is the same as it is in Cape Town, as the same as it is in Gary, the same as it is for the aging population, as it is for the African American community. Sometimes it is, a lot of times it's not. It's important that we know who justice is for. And we measure, we create metrics and ways of which to create this evidence. So the opportunity to do this fellowship, as Trinity said, was born out of a convening that I had the good fortune to hold here. And let me just say, I am forever grateful for just the legions of individuals and institutions that support me in producing this work. You are all contributors of it, as well as a legion of students who've been on call and on hand the last couple of days. Jessica and Toli were mentioned, but there's Sharon, there's the two M-squareds, the two Michaels, there's Whitney, there's Wanjiku. Many of your classmates have been a part of this. We may all have an identity that demands justice, but we also have an identity that demands participating in justice for others. This is the call to action that I think each of us can step into to do this work, and I think that has motivated the mayors to be here. We're interested in unpacking the issues of us versus them, the rights to occupy the city, political representation versus population composition, segregated spaces and disinvestment, migration and climate change, harmful narratives. These are all things that mayors have come to actually talk about over the course of the last 13 weeks. And we unpack the meaning of different forms of justice. It's very important to me, and if you've ever been in one of my classes, you know that I'm a real stickler for language. And so it's important us as professionals, as well as elected officials, to take care with the meaning of the vocabulary we use, so that we're also working to engage in an informed community. That's the process part that's just as important as the outcome. So, can we really design for justice? Who must we design justice for? And can we measure the impact of design is core and central to not only my research, but my practice and what I try to impart to all of you. So our course was 11 weeks. These mayors showed up every Wednesday at 2 o'clock. They had access to Canvas sites, just like students. And here they are. You're going to meet them in a moment. But they were also surrounded by scholars, practitioners, policy wonks, who every week provided these incredible lectures, readings, and many of these folks have been in the room with these mayors the last 3 days, providing that critical project feedback that Trinity talked about. Here is their syllabus, their readings and assignments. And each year we try to center this notion of social and spatial justice on an issue of the time. Last year it was very much about racial justice. This year has been about infrastructural justice. So thinking about infrastructure as a civic commons, thinking about just investment and equitable outcomes, and thinking about just neighborhoods, conflict, and collaboration as central to moving the needle. Each mayor had an assignment of creating their own Just City manifesto. So every week or so, and they had a mid-semester assignment to begin to think really critically about what is my challenge as I view it through the lens of justice or injustice. My students are laughing because they had to do that assignment too in their class. This is a popular tool that I use to get people to think about this. And so you may hear a little bit about what they created. In the end, you know, justice is a healing process. Process being probably the more important word even than healing. So I am going to invite our first panel of mayors, Mayor Jamel Tito Brown, Mayor Jacob Day, Mayor Emily Larson, and Mayor John T. Tecklenburg to join me up front as we start our first panel on Just Cities, infrastructures, and community building. We'll then take a shorter break because we're a little off point on time so that we can start a second panel on Just Cities, infrastructures, and college towns. So please give a warm welcome to our first panel of mayors. Their bios are on the GSD website, so I won't go through them. And we'll just begin. So mayors, you each have a microphone. You want to test? You shouldn't have to do anything but say hello.
Audio.
Hello.
Test.
So, Dean Whiting, I didn't know that our presence had been so visible, but it was her kind way of saying you all were loud. But we were loud, we were spirited, and again, these are the first time, these mayors have met each other off and on probably, but the first time the cohort was actually in person in fellowship, but they have built a fellowship over these 11 weeks. And so I think what you were hearing was just the fact that it was like old friends coming together and talking. So I'd love for each mayor to introduce themselves to you and their cities by a first prompt, which is to quickly paint a picture of your city today in the context of the just city. What currently makes your city just, and what would you say were the essential conditions of injustice that you explored through this program? And any of you can start, or I'll pick someone.
I'll go.
Thank you, Mayor Tecklenburg.
So, Charleston, South Carolina, I would describe us to be in a state of reconciliation because of our history. We are the city where almost 50% of enslaved Africans were brought to North America. Our city in the early 1800s derived its budget from the sale, the rental, and the possession of enslaved persons. And this really blew my mind. I didn't read about this in a history book when I was a kid. We had a city facility called the workhouse, that if you owned a slave and you didn't want to punish him yourself, you could turn him over to the city of Charleston and we'd whip him for you for a fee. I mean, it was just unbelievable. We had the tragic racial massacre in 2015, and it set the tone, as tragedies sometimes have to do, for a state of reconciliation. And that is meant, and it was really encompassed in the project I brought forward, of addressing infrastructure, where the city for centuries has spent money where rich white folks lived and not where those folks of color and low income lived. Flooding improvements, housing improvements, mobility improvements, just across the board, healthcare. So again, I would say we're in a state of reconciliation.
Thank you, Mayor. Mayor Brown from Youngstown.
Well, first of all, I want to say good afternoon. If my mother's watching, I made it. I'm on Harvard University campus. Just to say, just in case she can get on her notepad, I'm on Harvard, Mom. I made it. First of all, let me just say how excited I am to be able to share a little bit about the community that I love and I've born and raised in. Youngstown, Ohio is a legacy city. We were founded, when the steel mills were booming. So was Youngstown, Ohio. We got to our height of about 120,000, and it was any and everybody wanted to come to Youngstown, Ohio. And I talked about my family history is the migration, the southern migration happened for my family because they were looking for the jobs, and the jobs were in Ohio, and so that's how both my mother and my father were from Mississippi, and both sides of the family migrated here. However, on Black Monday is when we really saw the disinvestment or the deinstitutionalizing of steel mills, and that's when our steel mills closed down. And probably on a Friday afternoon like today, there were kids in the same classroom similar to yours, but on Monday morning, many of those families had packed up and moved away. Ironically enough, many of those had an opportunity to go somewhere else because their education or their social economic status, they could do so. However, there were communities that did not move from the steel town and hoping it would come back. Fast forward to today where we are, we can look at our community, we can look at the neighborhoods, and you can really see where those individuals who were migrated from the South are still living in these communities. And one of my issues is really how do we continue to govern for those individuals who live in that neighborhood, that they should have the same impact as other neighborhoods, and they should have access to all neighborhoods as no matter where you live in my community. So just to give you a brief history, that's our injustice, that there's not the equity, but we're now recognizing it, that we should be doing that.
Mayor Larson from Duluth.
Thank you.
Minnesota.
Hello. Yes. Hello, everybody. Greetings from Duluth, Minnesota. This week has been really extraordinary, and thank you, Toni, and the team for it. Duluth is 2.5 hours north of Minneapolis, St. Paul. So the experience we all had watching George Floyd be murdered was a clarion call if you lived in this state. Knowing that you are operating and living and maneuvering a government system with that experience so vivid and real and tangential and absolutely present in the moment. Some of the things we're doing well in Duluth that have made us move more justly forward. I've been mayor for 7 years, and when I started as mayor, we really began asking 4 core questions of every policy, every staff, every program investment, when we were hiring people, when we were issuing RFPs, and the questions were always about who did you talk to about this program or project? How did you engage people? Who did you leave out? And what about this proposal, this idea, this program, this project is going to make our community more fair? So we've spent the last 7 years really asking core questions of ourselves in how we're showing up for and with our community. And I think that work has been really good. But what I spent time working on and what this program has gotten me prepared for is really focusing that in how can we use the physical public infrastructure to create a sense of what I call radical belonging for our community. So that as we continue to evolve and grow, we're a community of 86,000 people. We have about 6.7 million tourists a year. We're a very creative economy. We are a city of choice, and many of you here might know us as a climate refuge, which is research that came out of Harvard here about our community, and we are seeing a lot of climate migration as well. But how do we ensure that people who are in this community feel like they radically belong? And so that's the work I'm still unpacking and excited to continue to move forward.
And we're going to circle back to the East Coast. Mayor Day from Salisbury, Maryland.
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, everyone.
Also, architecture planning background. Just want to give you a little shout out.
She outed me. She outed me. I was going to try to hide that through the whole panel. Well, so you can tell by now we were not selected because we've figured it all out. And I don't know that there's a mayor in America who has. So whether it's reconciliation, whether it's moving more fairly forward or toward a more just city, that's what each of us is trying to do. And so in Salisbury, a city that is a small city, 35,000 people, fast growing, young, median age of 26, and diverse, a minority-majority city. For Salisbury, a small city anchored in a rural region, there's still a lot of conflict. We're right on the Mason-Dixon line. And that conflict comes more frequently in recent years to the forefront. It manifested itself several years ago around a symbol, a Confederate monument. And the Confederate monument, owned by our county government, we, the city, proposed that they get it out of our city, and they didn't like that. And there were quotes that were offered, one of which was "over my dead body." I mean, it stirred strong emotions. But the symbol on the courthouse lawn, the space that should represent justice, had to come down, and I'm proud to say that it has. In its place is now a monument to the 3 men who were killed, who were lynched at that very same location, on that courthouse lawn. Long ago, yes, but recognizing that we must tell the truth about our past. So those are symbols, and symbols matter, but symbols are fairly easy. So what comes next? That's where we're at today, trying to recognize that decisions about paving and housing and access and proximity to jobs, all of those things are the tougher work. And that's why I was proud to participate in this program.
I want to, you've each described and are using the language of injustice, and some very specific values are coming out. And I think part of what we're trying to impart through the course is the ability
really the testing of how values steer a conversation and steer us towards potentially different outcomes. Reconciliation, belonging, truth, inclusion, fairness. And I'm also just noticing for the first time, you've each chosen to wear one of our Just City value pens, which I'm finding really awesome because I didn't actually ask you to do that, but you did. So I'm going to lean into that a little bit because I want to make sure you also have this opportunity, in the context of often our planning methodologies are asking students to plan from an asset-based perspective, right? So this may be an opportunity, and I have no idea why you chose the value that you did, whether you chose it as a personal sort of value or value you hope for your city that you want to get to, or value you hope for your city that you have. But I wonder if you might each just do a few minutes on telling me why you picked the value that you did. And is it an aspiration for your city? Is it a current condition for your city? So I'm going to go back to Mayor Day. What value did you choose and why?
So what value did I choose on my pen?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. Trinity handed them out. I'm an outer.
You gave it away.
I'm an outer. Hold on. Well, okay.
Man, that was a epic fail, but let's go with it.
That's all right. Look.
We're wearing them.
Look. Here's the thing. So resilience is what I've got, but that's not really, I think, the value that best reflects where we're at. So if I can talk about a different one.
Thank you for helping me reframe that question. What's the value that best reflects where you're at?
Yeah. So for us, it's dignity.
Dignity.
And
right.
We talk a lot about opportunity in our city, and opportunity is important. We want everyone in our community to be able to access a life of success, and one where they don't have to leave, and they don't have to leave their neighborhood, and they don't have to look over the fence or over the tracks at another part of town. But a life of dignity is something that should be fundamental, guaranteed, and an absolute minimum for every person in our community, and it's not. And let's acknowledge that it is not. We're not there yet. So that's the value I think we're most focused on.
Okay, Mayor Brown, what's the value that you would like most reflected in your community?
You're my lady, right? You're my girl. For the last 11 weeks, I picked this for two reasons.
Good.
Fairness. When I saw it, I say fairness was crucial, and it matched my suit for the second one. But we'll talk about the first one, the fairness that we had. I think no matter what zip code or what census tract you live in, I think I looked at. I think it was yours earlier, where it looked at your different census tract. If you lived in one census tract, your age expectancy was almost like 9 or 10 years more. And I'm looking at the city of Youngstown, and we're looking at it, underlining health issues, and it's not fair that if you live in one census tract just a half a mile down the road, you're at 71 years, and they're at 76 or 75. In national average, that we're falling behind. That's not fair. So when we talk about being fair, and that's really it just really hit me like, no, that's not fair. You always get the crowd that's roaring and say, that's not right. That's just not right. So that's why I picked it, because it's just not right. And as long as I'm sitting in the seat of mayor, I want to make sure that I look at things from that lens. And I mentioned what's going to be the value for other mayors is that we can look at things a little different in a different lens, because we've been here for the last 3 days and 11 weeks.
Yeah. Mayor Tecklenburg.
So my pen is aspirations, and I was thinking of the aspiration of civilization. The highest ideal is justice, and all our focus on the just cities, I guess to reflect Mayor Day's comments, that same aspiration is what our founding fathers simply put forward, liberty and justice for all, that we're all created equal. And we acknowledge that we're not there yet. We're still trying to make this union more perfect. And so that aspiration of justice in our city and in our country and world, for that matter.
And Mayor Larson.
I did pick mine, by the way. So, and mine.
I just started in the wrong spot.
Mine,
okay?
yeah. I had you. And mine is right. I picked it with great intention because I feel so strongly that part of my work and part of what drives government is to create equal space for people just to exist, right? That there are very few places in our world that public can just exist. You don't need a pass card, you don't need an ID, you don't need a zip code, you don't need an income. You can go to a park, you can go to a library. This is the work of government, to make sure that you have a right just to exist. And you don't have to prove yourself over that. So that's actually why I picked it out, because for me, it is so wrong that in our community, I did life expectancy in my community this morning and talked about that a little bit. And literally one neighborhood away from each other, there's a 10-year difference in life expectancy. And every single resident really has a right to a long life, right? And the benefits with which that could lead them to that, and the opportunities and the choices. That's actually a right. Housing is a right. Existence is a right. Clean air and water, that's actually a right. And so to me, that is government's work. That's what's so exciting about government, is that we have that mandate, and we can choose to move forward towards that with our values really boldly and with justice at the core of it.
Yeah. Dignity, fairness, aspiration, and rights. These are all conditions of and values of well-being and humanity. Over the course of the last 3 days, the mayors presented projects that either involved neighborhood change and revitalization, public facilities or civic infrastructures, places for people, or infrastructures that were trying to connect places and spaces and people. These values help us center, coincidentally and perfectly, around the theme of your panel, which is around community building. Your projects were trying to build community, each of your examples, and we've heard, and thank you, Dr. Jackson, for teeing this up, that process is equally, and in some cases, more important than the artifact or the outcome of the work. Every single project we talked about, no matter what the project scope was, or in some cases the project scale, participation and community building was always one of the 5 questions you wanted feedback on. You all represent mid and small-sized cities, so I want you to maybe elaborate on what have been some of the ways you've found it either easy or hard to involve community members, and I want you to think broadly about who is a community member in the design and decision-making process of this public planning and development work that you do, broadly or specifically. And has there been a tactic that you've used to create these partnerships to build community, to make decisions that have been the hardest members of your community to reach? So is it an easy or hard thing to do when you're in a small city versus a mid-sized city or a big city? Who is your community? How are you working to make decisions with and alongside of them? And any of you can jump in on some thoughts of that.
I'll start, because the first thing I thought of, Toni, when you asked that question is it's not hard to hear people I don't think it's any harder or easier in a smaller city to hear people, but it's really hard to hear all people, right? Like every community has loud people who are confident, and they're at the council meetings, and they're good at public forums, and they show up, and we know them by first name. We all have these folks in our community. We all have them in our families, right? And so that's easy, but that's not the voice that I'm trying to hear. I know that voice. I know that person, that resident. They have access to me. They have access to process. And so what is hard, Duluth, I do often say that we are small enough to get things done and big enough to matter. And that's kind of my pitch, right, at the legislative level or whatever, that we don't have a ton of turf wars because we just can't afford to have that. If I were to have an argument with you today, we would actually have to figure it out because I will see you 20 times later this week. Those kinds of things. It keeps you fairly honest in that sense, but it can keep people fairly guarded too, because it means that you don't have quite as much privacy. And so some of what we have, what we strive to do is to meet and engage people in ways that they let us know are meaningful and impactful for them. So we do community organizing as part of our strategy. We do door knock. We actually pay people to go out door knocking, to phone bank, to do all the things that I've done in my, political pro-democracy work, but infuse that into policy making. And then the last thing I'll say is what's really helpful is to keep showing up. And when people start giving me their resistance, that's when I know that their input is getting really real. And I got to keep showing up and keep showing up. And when they're willing to be angry at me, it means they care. And I got to keep showing up. And so a lot of it is just the persistence, and we're really imperfect at it, but I know we're doing better than has been done in the past, and that's really meaningful. But the crux of it, especially as you're talking about how people live their lives, how they're walking through their neighborhoods, what does it feel like when they walk into their housing development? I mean, those are very visceral, personal experiences that people should have some joy about in their life. And so really it's hard. It's hard.
I don't think, no matter what size your city as mayor, you could probably ask a mayor that 500,000 or 50,000. There's always going to be those same issues. I think when we talk as mayors, we're like, oh, you have that same person or you have that same issue in your community. For me, in the project that we brought to the class, it was really the citizens who really started engaging. You talk about how do we engage them. I knew that there was citizen organization of people who still live in that community from years on. And I went to specifically those that I knew were the leaders, not the ones who were making the noise. And anybody can bang pots together and make noise, but the ones who can really put together a succinct message that resonates with me was critical. And I listened to a lot of times, people come to the mayor and they expect the mayor to push back or, ball my fists up and say no and want to fight. And in this situation, I'm like, you're right. And now for me, as the organizer in me says, now I need you to activate your community, and we're going to have a meeting on this issue, and their push for justice for this property to be cleaned up and to be focused on something different was the community engagement, and now we're looking to see what happens after that.
Can I just dive into one thing you talked about, because you called yourself an organizer? Do you find that coming from being an organizer background has made it easier for you to be a mayor and engage and find partnership with different members of your community than a mayor who hasn't and doesn't have that experience, and why?
One thing, first of all, you need to understand people and personalities. Mm-hmm. And as a former organizer, my one job from my mentor, he says, your job is to get people to the table. Mm-hmm. He said, now you're not always going to set the agenda. Some are going to come with their own agenda, but you always want an outcome from when you bring them to the table. So it worked really well for me just to know that, okay, now I'm the mayor, but I have a group that I need to help organize around this issue. And we won't even go into environmental justice organizing that I have and I'm working on right now as well as mayor. I always say there's no problem too big or too small for me as mayor, because I think at the end of the day, if you want to, 5 words to describe a mayor: find a problem, solve it. That's who we are. 5 words: find a problem, solve it, and that's how we operate.
So others weighing in on how you do this, and I'm specifically interested in how you're involving different community members in the decision-making aspect of the processes you're working on, and who are you, and who is community, or who are you thinking of when I ask the question of community?
I want to offer a cautionary tale from Salisbury, if I can. and this is about inclusion and listening, and who is involved and who is engaged and who's left out. In Salisbury, on the edge of the neighborhood where from which I brought the project that I focused on during this program, the Church Street neighborhood, we recognized that the neighborhood was the closest thing to what was an erased neighborhood. And that erased neighborhood was called Georgetown. Georgetown was carved through by two highways, two large divided highways that crisscross in the center of our city. So Georgetown was gone, and many of the displaced families moved into the Church Street neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, we wanted to ask people what they wanted to see on a new facade that was exposed, a newly exposed facade in a mural. And we wanted them to tell us. And so we gathered historians, we gathered residents, we did door knocking, we did phone banking. We thought we had everyone involved. And the reflection back was art that represented African-American leaders from the Georgetown and Church Street neighborhoods. And we're very proud of that. What we've realized since is that there was a very large and growing Haitian population in the neighborhood that completely disengaged from the process. They didn't offer anything, they didn't show up, they didn't participate. And it's not just about language, it's not just about our outreach tactics, it's about making them feel like they had a potential to have a voice in the process. And frankly, I'm not sure we got that right. So it's a lesson that has taught us a little bit about how we engage, and I've been reminded of that even since during this session, about how we engage that population, and really everyone, because who is community? It's all of us. No one should be left.
And then part of that conversation, what got raised was the distinctions between outreach, engagement, power sharing, right? And one of the things that emerged through the conversation of your project that I think had relevance for other projects is, when do mayors and their staff think to cede certain responsibilities to others as a mechanism of power sharing, right? So that the mayor's office is not the one running the engagement, but the community itself, and in this case, the Haitian community, becomes the partner with the mayor to do the engagement work, which isn't also just about, engagement is not just a tactic. It is a relationship that you are building to involve community in its economic growth, right? In its arts and activation, in its storytelling, in its building, in its construction, in its spending, right? And so it's, one of the things we talked about is unpacking this idea of engagement as just this process where we invite people to tell us something, right? But engagement is in fact inclusion, and perhaps a form of radical belonging. Mayor Tecklenburg, you want to tell us, you're doing some really interesting things around engagement vis-a-vis inclusion through some of the offices that you're setting up, but tell us how you are involving people in decision-making around the kind of planning and design work you're doing.
Well, first I want to say I'm so sorry I failed to compliment Dr. Jackson before she left. Her remarks were terrific, weren't they?
You're on tape, so we'll get it to her.
Thank you. They were terrific. And Mayor Whiting, thank you for putting up with us this week. And
that may catch on, Sarah.
And interestingly, I brought a project to create a linear park in the spine of the peninsula of Charleston that was a former rail line, but can solve all kinds of disparities that have existed now for decades, maybe generations. And in fact, one of the questions that I came here to ask was, how can we do a better job of engagement? Because I didn't feel like we had done that great of a job to date. We're going to go back after this session and do better. And it's been difficult over the last few years, particularly especially with COVID and the advent of so many means of communication. You got to cover all the bases of trying to reach people, and then you get down to the old basics, right, of knocking on the doors in the neighborhood of the adjacent neighborhood. But the one that worked the most was just standing out there, because the old rail line, people, even though it's not fixed up pretty yet, people do use it to get back and forth, and can even ride their bike on it now. So just stand out there and talk to the people that are using it now. What do you think about this? And that kind of engagement was really helpful that we did. But what's really opened my eyes in the discussion here today and this week was more about the power sharing and what that engagement is going to do to meaningfully shape the outcome.
Yeah. I'm going to throw in one other question. I do want to encourage folks watching online that you can start to enter in questions. I have a device, very cool device here, where I can see the questions and put them into the room. And we also have roaming microphones for anyone in the room that has them. So as we said, Trinity and I kind of think about each cohort and the crisis or issue of the moment, and how it can connect to issues of thinking about social and spatial justice. And this year for us, we leaned into the opportunities around the federal government's construct of infrastructure, and the fact that there were going to be these funding sources coming down the line, and inviting you all as mayors to think about what are the infrastructures that are critical for you, and certainly the vulnerabilities of both social and physical infrastructures during the pandemic were amplified tenfold. And so we've been asking each of you over the last 11 weeks to think about the social and physical infrastructures that you wanted some feedback on. So I want to give you this opportunity to maybe talk about how maybe your notion of infrastructure has changed through this process, and what kind of support do you need from the federal government and perhaps other partners. If you think about the projects that you presented, which were a combination of social and physical, and sometimes they were in one. But since you have this moment and in this audience, what do you need to support what that infrastructure is? What is the infrastructure? Why is it important to your community? And what do you need to help move that infrastructure project forward?
Okay, I'll start. So my background is in social work, and so I have always been to me, I feel like, the federal government finally caught on to what infrastructure is. I have always really believed that the social fabric and relationships and human infrastructure is infrastructure, right? And so I am thrilled. I am so happy that we finally get a chance to tell the story, because what my frustration has been, especially with federal and state funding, is that we can get all the meetings and we do a really aggressive job of legislative advocacy and getting all the money we need. But now we get to tell the story, and that's what's really different about this federal funding and the formula and the opportunities that this administration is laying out, is to say, what is the human impact of this? We know that, for instance, transportation isn't just how you get to and from work, how you drop your kids to and from. Those are hours in your day that you are spending behind a wheel when you could be in relationship with somebody important in your life, right? So that human storytelling is always a part of it. So what I need for my project to be successful, which is really looking at a city block that we have full control over, that is a library, and I want to create something that is bolder and bigger for a sense of belonging, whether that is a community living space. There's lots I could talk about that, and I can talk with anyone later about my idea, but what I really need is money. I have the data, I have information, I believe I have the public support, and we will work and go back and re-engage with new strategies that I've learned here. But to be honest, justice takes fundamental investment, and we have built centuries of systems with great intention and investment to make them unfair. And we have to invest in creating greater fairness. So we can do all the sweat equity, and we can do the relationship building, and we can do all of the other human elements, but it really requires the same level of attention. And we know that budgets are moral documents. We all know this. And what we need is the opportunity to tell the story. And the federal government's giving that to us now, and we will always seek other opportunities to do that, but we have to very intentionally invest in new systems so that we can disinvest in the intentional systems that still exist and are completely holding people back.
Yeah.
So I got to shout out to the Biden administration, and we mayors, we all have more projects than we got money. It's just, it's unbelievable, the things that we want to do and can't fund. And so we're all reading all these narratives coming out from the Biden administration about infrastructure money that's available and all these grant programs and what we can apply for. I mean, it's mind-boggling almost. But to put it in a phrase, they all have an equity lens component to them now. And that wasn't true until President Biden got elected and helped make this happen. So I feel blessed to be in a good spot that Charleston and these other mayors that you'll hear from today have all been working on justice in their cities because we feel like it's the right thing to do. Now, as it turns out, it's going to be very helpful on our grant applications, you know, because we'll be judged for the things that we're already working on. And so anyway, I feel like my grant application, by the way, went out on my project. And since we're trying to knit together neighborhoods that were severed by a highway project 70 years ago that ripped through a African-American neighborhood, and we're going to reconnect those neighborhoods and achieve some social justice with the project that we're doing, it will be favorably viewed, and I think that's a great thing. And again, thanks to the administration.
I'm going to push questions in, even as the last two mayors answer my last question. Dean Whiting.
So thank you all. You all give me a lot of hope, which is what we all need right now. But I want to return to Mayor Larson's point about telling stories. And I want to ask, how do you tell the stories today, given the diversity of our audiences? You know, how do you compensate for the problem of not reaching the Haitian audience in your city? How do you tell stories in what language and with what media? How do you reach your publics?
Well, that's a great question. I will just say really briefly, Duluth has a very large media market, too large for the amount of news we have, quite frankly, but it's awesome. I mean, we have, 4 daily TV stations, radio stations. It's just the culture of who we are. And so we have very conventional ways that we communicate to people. But the most impactful ways, I have found people give me their biggest truth when no one's around, right? When I can just have a listening session with a group of people that isn't on social media. We don't celebrate it later. We're not taking photos. We're not showing proof, but you're just showing up. And I think, one of the style of communication that I think is most helpful, you can read a lot in what people are saying and what they're not saying. And I think anytime a mayor assumes that they're the smartest person in the room is a global mistake. Right? And anytime a mayor comes in with a solution is generally a global mistake. Like we should be sponging up, right? And so I guess I have more specific examples I can give, but I think you're maybe thinking more globally about how some of that is. But okay, wait, one more thing I guess I'll say, because maybe this will be the last thing I say. But one of the things that can frustrate me about mayors, and that's not true about this cohort, this is a really steady, brave cohort, but often we do campaign with something. We campaign with a vision, and we're very specific about it, and we build strategies around it, and we do outreach around it, and then you can watch. Many mayors then are elected, and it's like they forgot they had a vision. And it's because it's scary to stick to that and actually follow through on it. And the more that mayors can lead with those values and stick to their vision and have the accountability partners be like, that's not the vision that we committed to with you. That's the communication too.
To this point about media markets, or the role of traditional media in storytelling. I think, in each of our cases, we're the principal city of our media market, and so the reporters always want to talk to the mayor. And you can bully your way to being the messenger for every story. And it is a tragic mistake if that's the way storytelling is happening in your community or in your market. So I think finding ways to elevate voices that have a story to tell, that are non-traditional in the sense of entering those spaces where they're rebroadcast over and over again, that's the trick. And throughout the pandemic, I believe that in our community, that has found a platform, and for us it's a vulnerable populations task force, and the diverse representation in that group are telling each other stories, and it's a small group, 40 or so people, but they're telling each other stories, and eventually someone is saying, well, wait, more people need to hear that, and they're finding new ways to share that work, and the city's becoming sort of a reflection in a microphone at least for some of those stories. So I think that sort of model is needed more often.
If your median age is 26, traditional media isn't the best way to actually tell
Also true, absolutely.
That's right.
I think, Mayor, if you really want to get to the point of how it's going, you really got to tell the story, but you also have to make it real to the audience. And when I say that, is like you said, most mayors, the television station in my community, in my area is right across from City Hall. So, I'll call them over or I'll tell them something. But I like to I always put context to it. I really want to put a person or a face to it that we can identify with. And really, I'll kind of braid in the question about the infrastructure and how can you help me with it. Just for my community, we have a high infant mortality rate. So we're 4 times, the African Americans are 4 times as high in our county as the white babies to be born. And we know that lead is one of the bigger pieces, and the lead is actually an unallowable infrastructure replacement. I started the conversation to tell you that we are a legacy city, and we started building homes because the population was growing, but we didn't care about didn't think it was the material. That's what we're using. Now we're realizing if we're going to give these babies an opportunity to be the next generation or to be, a graduate of Harvard, we've got to give them, we've got to really focus on the next generation. So for me, it's looking at taking these dollars to impact the next generation of learners, as well as leaders. Then you look at my project. When we look at it, we talk about food insecurities or food deserts. Now, mom who's pregnant with the baby, and she's not eating well because now she's got to get on the transportation. She's got to get on the bus to go outside of the community. We have such a large leakage of economics that are leaving our community. So when you talk about the whole cycle of just and unjust, and how do you continue to help a mayor like myself, always make sure I want to put a person in front of them so you can visually see it. To talk about, well, let's replace the lead lines. No, I want to put it as a name, a face, and then I want to show you how there's an opportunity for what we're doing so that we can have future learners and future leaders to graduate from college.
And part of the reason I was asking the question of you all to elaborate on what you needed as a way of advancing your social and/or spatial infrastructure project. And I want to tie it, Sarah, to your question about narrative, is I think one of the things as a takeaway from each of your projects, even if you presented a physical infrastructure project in the very conventional way we think about it, like as a trail or a transportation system, several of you presented infrastructures as these public facilities and or neighborhood context, so there's this ecosystem, right? Our funding streams are siloed around the thing, a sewer, a water line, a transit line. And I think each of these projects forced us to connect, right, why a people and place-based strategy or set of infrastructures were codependent in terms of the success of it, right? Because the access to work, affects healthcare, and so you can see the systems of infrastructure that wrap around one. Narrative then becomes important, not just to the constituency,
as a way of information sharing and or gathering. I think it's also important to our elected officials and the federal government as they begin to think about how to commingle funding streams and NOFAs and funding solicitations such that these guys can respond in such a way that emphasizes the connection between sources that they need. And we actually started out the fellowship in February, and we had folks from USDOT and so forth, and we talked really specifically about you need to send us the signal that you really are going to look at this in an integrated way such that we can show you through our data and our Just City lens of the importance of connecting this. So that's a narrative, and another kind of narrative exercise. I know that Mayor Tecklenburg wanted to chime in. Let's see if there's a question from the floor. If there are, raise your hands and we'll take a couple before we take a really short break. But Mayor Tecklenburg, did you want to?
So I just wanted to share that Charleston has so many stories to tell, and some of them aren't too pretty, like the one I shared a few minutes ago. I have put in a plug. Later this year, we're opening the International African American Museum in Charleston. I want y'all all to come next year and visit Charleston and see. It's going to be a remarkable, full telling of African American history here in the United States, and also public art.
Good. So I'm going to take all three questions at once for efficiency time. So question 1, question 2, question 3.
Okay, well, first off, thank you all for speaking. It's really nice to see sort of the optimism of all of you about the cities that you're running. So mine's sort of a two-part question. The first is to Mayor Day here. First off, how did you identify the missing engagement aspects of the Haitian community looking back? I was recently working on an affordable housing competition, and we were doing community engagement, and one of the things we were running into was saying, okay, we think we've gotten to a lot of people, but how do we actually know? Mm-hmm. And then sort of looking forward, and this is a question I think can open up to everybody, is what tactics do you see as potential methods for finding, supporting, and sharing that agency with the communities that don't engage in traditional models and oftentimes for good reason are in fact distrustful of these models themselves?
Okay, great.
Thank
so
you.
While we pass the mic down, I'm going to go ahead and ask Suri to ask her question, and then we'll come back to you as the third.
Hi, Professor Griffin.
Hi, Suri. How are you?
Oh my goodness. This is so rich and beautiful. Thank you. My name is Suri. I am a policy fellow at the Next 100 and also a very proud first-gen grad from Harvard GSD in urban planning and design, now in the policy world. So, hey. Yes, I come from parents. I grew up with folks who were street vendors in Jamaica Plain, got to see how they designed beautiful, welcoming public spaces. And I come from folks that really struggled with affordable housing in this city right here. And it brought me to city halls. So talking about infrastructure, talking about how do you reach your publics, as Dean Whiting was talking about. And now I work on policy, looking at local and federal. How can we create funding streams that support local governments to design policy spaces so people feel welcome there? They're public spaces. I come from friends, family, community members who do not feel welcome in the spaces where policy decisions get made. And I know mayors are really leading the way in how we can design those spaces to be more welcoming and equitable, like the physical building of City Hall, right? And I want to know more. What do you want to see happen? How can that be? I'm literally going through.
Okay, we're going to take that one question.
All right, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I'm so
and catch him on the break. And then our last question.
Yeah, so building on that a bit as well, just thinking about the legacy of community building and just knowing that infrastructure takes a long, long time. Given that there are term limits, you can only be in office so long, how do you ensure that legacy on projects that take 20, 30, 40 years and have sort of this lasting impact? How do you make sure that doesn't get diluted or transferred into something that you wouldn't believe in the same way?
Great, well, that's a great question because we actually talked about immediate sort of next step. So let me just run down these from memory. So the last one is like, are all infrastructures long lead times? And then what are the first steps? Second is how might you think about making welcoming spaces and or funding streams with using your own city hall as kind of laboratory? Questions about, how did you find you were missing an audience for engagement and tactics for that sharing of agency. And then there's a question in the chat, which is super specific. Are your communities talking about the removal of protections of single-family only zoning? So answer any or all of these questions, but we'll give you each a last word to take on one of those questions.
Okay. All right. Well, first of all, to answer your question, and this is scary, we didn't realize it until long after the project was completed. And it was the pandemic that exposed that the Haitian population had grown so significantly in that neighborhood. Anecdotally, I could have told you that, but we didn't realize how significant it was. And so all of a sudden we're realizing that voice never appeared in any public forum, in any session, any design session we had around the mural that we were creating, that we were trying to draw all voices into. So unfortunately, it took time, and it took the pandemic and recognizing that we had missed that. I just want to add one other thing. Yeah. It's only a matter of time before you run for mayor somewhere, right? And tell your colleagues and peers in design they need to do the same thing, because the beauty of design and policy is not only that you appreciate the making of these spaces, but you've also gone through an education that has taught you how to ultimately stop the planning and start making and start doing. And at some point you got to build that final model, right? So to start making. So I think there's a real opportunity there. And again, tell your peers to run for mayor.
And yeah, she's the perfect student to tell that to. Great, thank you.
I will take two. Your question was about...
The timeline.
Yes. Okay.
Timeline.
Listen. So thank you for the question. So there, you can go fast and get stuff done. You can go slow and embed the work. And there are many times that I had been pressured to go really fast on something. But I actually slowed down and built whatever systemic change I was seeking to make into city policy, into city practice, into city hiring. Because I want the next mayor to have to literally say they do not care about justice, equity, fairness, or sustainability, that they are actually going to have to undo it. So there is a way to do that, but it requires a lot of patience, and which a lot of people don't have, and they shouldn't. They should be angry and demanding action right away. But it requires a lot of pacing as a mayor to get to know where you're trying to get this community to stay, because you're always going to backtrack a little bit. And then I want to talk about briefly your, thank you for raising that question. I think public spaces are 1,000% for the public. And so that's through public art, that is through, we invite a lot of people into the building, and who's working in the building also matters. When I first came into office, there was a Hall of Mayors. I'm the first female. And so all these large, old paintings, white men smoking, really crazy. And we took them down, which really made people mad, and I actually don't even care. But the point is, and we found a way to honor the service. So I don't mean to be disrespectful, but if we're going to have a space that works for everybody, we need to both honor the heritage and move forward on who the space is going to be for. And so keep asking those questions, because space does matter. If you feel like you can see yourself there, you will be there, right? But also push public entities to be hiring community members that look like the community, that are the community they're becoming. Because you can also have this very comfortable space and still not see yourself in it.
All right, I'm going to try to go speed speaking here. Let's try this. I'll start with the top. Here's what I would suggest to you. You say, how did we you miss it? Sometimes you're not going to you're not going to hit it all. You're not going to get everyone. What you need to do in true leadership, you recognize when you don't, when you say, well, I missed that group in the organization. Acknowledge it first. The first thing in leadership, acknowledge what happened, and then you try to figure, well, how can we make sure that we miss this group, that we don't have other groups that we're missing as well. So just making sure we acknowledge. We're not not going to get it all right all the time. We just got to always try to do the right thing. And to talk about a legacy opportunity, the question is, you really, I wish I would have come into my office in 2018 and there was a playbook for me to really I'm on page 60, and here's how we continue to go on. Policy trumps process all the time. If you put it in a policy, you put it in legislation, you're right. Let the next individual say that, oh, we're going to undo it. We don't believe in that. That's a public policy, and you're trying to undo it. But you got to make sure you continue to put it in there to trump process. Last young lady over here, I don't know if it's mayor, Congress, or wherever you decide to go. The one thing I always say, I pride myself on making sure that my cabinet looks like me, but also females. I was raised in a single parent home. My mother is probably the smartest, most brightest, and most political lady you want to meet. But she made sure that it's all about equity. You know, I have my park and rec director. I like to always shout out, in the United States, only 18 female park and rec directors, and she's one of the 18. So do the math. Last math question I'll leave with you. I'm the 51st mayor, but only the second African-American mayor in my city's history to be the mayor. So, and we are probably 50% African-American in my community. So you always have to start somewhere, and you got to continue pushing forward.
In the legacy question, in Charleston, we don't have term limits, and so my predecessors, he solved that issue. He served for 40 years. Oh, so every 40 years or so, we got a new mayor, right? So I'd like to address the zoning question, and just recently we lifted our single family to at least allow accessory dwelling units. But I wanted to share with y'all that Charleston is so close to the ocean, and with climate change and sea level rise, we're redoing our zoning to adjust for elevation. I know we got FEMA rules and all like that, but we are reducing density when you're close to sea level and increasing density when you got a little bit of elevation. So it depends on where.
Boy, did you just open up a whole nother panel for later today.
And then lastly, I just wanted to draw this connection of our two sponsors, being the National Endowment of Arts and the Mayor's Institute of Civic Design. When you're an artist, and when you're an artist, if you're pretty good, you're expressing yourself, right? If you're great, you're expressing humanity. And I kind of view civic design in the same way for a community, that you're expressing humanity through the design of your city. And so if you're really being inclusive, if you're really being thoughtful, when you do the design of your city, it's going to reflect all of humanity, just like great art does. So it's kind of interesting that both the National Endowment and the Civic Design sponsor this forum here today. Thank you all.
Great. So if I may, because I feel like we spent so much time together, John, Tito, Emily, Jacob, thank you all so very much for a really engaging panel. Let's give our mayors a round of applause.